In the business world, it's dog eat dog, and you need every bit of competitive edge you can possibly get. Whether you're a salesperson, an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or corporate executive, you've landed on the podcast that gives you that edge and more. This is the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. Exploring the strategies, tactics, and mindset shifts needed to elevate your business and leadership skills to new heights. Your host has walked the walk. He's coached thousands of clients to remarkable results and rubbed shoulders with legends like Tony Robbins, Ken Blanchard, Jack Canfield, and Brian Tracy. It's practical advice, inspiring stories, and the occasional dose of tough love, helping you to overcome challenges and seize opportunities. This is the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. And now your host, owner of Potential in Motion, coaching you to the edge of what's possible, Tom Kelly.
Welcome to the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Kelly. I'd like to start today's episode with an interesting story. I was doing a workshop for the sales team at a local insurance company here in Chicago, and the focus of the workshop was how to double your sales. There were about 20 salespeople in the audience, and I started my presentation asking a simple question. How many of you would love to double your sales this year? My expectation was that every hand in the audience would enthusiastically shoot up into the air. Instead, what happened was quite surprising. Only one person raised his hand. I then heard an audible gasp from the business owner in the back of the room. He was shocked that all 20 hands weren't raised. Then I followed up with another question. Why don't more of you want to double your sales? A voice from the back of the room shouted, because if I wanted to double my sales, then I'm going to have to work twice as hard, and I don't want to do that. Then I asked, how many of you feel that way? Every hand of the room went up, including the sales guy that said he wanted to double his sales. I then chuckled and looked at the guy who had originally raised his hand. So you're willing to work twice as hard to double your sales? You must be crazy. Everyone laughed. What happened next was interesting. I said to the audience, what if I showed you a way that you could double your sales while only having to work 5 to 10% harder? Another voice shouted out from the audience, BS, that's impossible. There's no way you can double your sales unless you put in significantly more hours. I then asked this person if he'd be willing to come up to the front of the room so that I could use him as an example to prove my point. He was more than happy to step up to the front of the room as he had 100% certainty that there was no way that you can double your sales without working twice as hard. I then proceeded to show him how we could make small, simple tweaks at each step of the sales process that would end up leading to massive increases in his sales. By the time I was done, the entire room was on board with doubling their sales. During today's episode, I'm going to talk about the simple process that I use with my sales clients to help them generate massive increases in their sales by making minor shifts at each step of the process. You're going to learn how to optimize your sales process by working smarter, not harder. By the time we're finished, I'm going to shatter any disempowering beliefs that you may have about growing your sales, and we'll have some powerful tools that you can start to leverage right away. I'll cover the 3 simple steps you can take to maximize your sales process, and then I'll cover 3 additional proven strategies that you can use to increase your revenues. So let's jump in and get started. Step number 1 is you have to know your numbers. This seems pretty simple, right? You would think that most salespeople and business owners know what their numbers are. However, in my experience, this is often not the case. While most sales organizations have CRMs that track and measure sales metrics, most salespeople hate using them, and most salespeople and sales managers don't know how to use the data to create measurable improvements. The bottom line is that you have to know where you are right now with your sales system, and if you aren't tracking and measuring your results, you can't manage them. So if you don't know simple things like how many prospecting calls you are making, how many appointments you are scheduling, how many sales you are closing, and what your average sales price is, then you need to start tracking those numbers. Once you have your sales numbers, then you can move on to the next step, which is to leverage and optimize your sales system. Most salespeople make increasing their sales way too complicated. If you simply make small improvements at each step in the sales process, you can massively increase your results. So let's do a quick example. I'll use some numbers from a typical insurance salesperson. Let's assume for this example that you have the following daily sales activity level. 35 calls per day to make appointments, 10 actual conversations with prospects, 4 appointments scheduled, 3 appointments actually keep, 1 sale is made per day, and your average sales price to keep this simple is $1,000. Now, if we simply increase each of these numbers by a small amount, let's say 10%, let's see what happens. We'll start by increasing the number of outbound calls by 10% from 35 to 38. That's 3 more calls per day. Since only 10 people out of 35 are going to answer your call and have a conversation with you, that should only take a few more minutes of your time. Now, if we get the same percentage of people picking up the phone, 28.5%, that will give us 11 people that pick up and have a conversation with us. We'll take this number and increase it by 10% as well, which gives us 12 conversations per day. Are you with me so far? Now, if 40% of those people agree to an appointment like we had before, we'll schedule 5 people. And if we increase that by 10%, we'll get 5.5 appointments per day. Out of those, if we use the same 75% kept ratio from before, we would get 4.125 appointments per day. Again, increasing this number by 10%, we'd end up with 4.5 appointments per day. If we were to keep our close ratio of 33%, this would give us 1.485 sales per day. Increasing this by 10% gives us 1.6335 sales per day, which we'll round down to 1.6 for simplicity. Finally, if we increase our sales by 10%, this would give us 1.6 sales per day times $1,100 per sale, which equals $1,760 in sales per day, which is a 76% increase in our sales. So by leveraging each step in the sales process by a small amount of 10%, we increased our sales by 76%. In case I went through the math too quickly, the numbers we started with were 35 outbound calls, leading to 10 conversations, which leads to 4 appointments, which leads to 3 people keeping and 1 person not keeping the appointment, and 1 sale at $1,000. By increasing each step in the process by 10%, we end up with 38 outbound calls, 12 conversations, 5.5 appointments, 4.5 kept, 1.6 sales at $1,100 per sale for a total of $1,760 per day, which is a 76% increase. Now, I'm sure you're saying, hey, Tom, that's great, but now I'm spending more time setting up appointments, and my appointments went from 3 per day to 4.5 per day. That's going to take more time. Yes, that's true, but that's a great problem to have, right? And it's not that big of an issue. If you think about it, let's assume that it was taking you 90 minutes to make 35 dials. That's 2.5 minutes per call on average. So adding 3 more calls only adds 7.5 minutes to your calling time. Let's also assume that each appointment takes you an hour. So you're adding 1.5 appointments to your day, which is an extra 1.5 hours of time. Assuming you're working an 8-hour day, you're going to increase that to about 9.5 hours a day. For that extra 1.5 hours of your time, you're getting 76% more sales. That's a pretty huge increase. Additionally, if you don't want to work any more hours, you'll get a 48% increase in sales if you work 8 hours a day, which is also a massive increase in sales. Now, you may also be wondering how you can improve each step in the process by 10%. Well, that brings us to step number 3, which is role model best practices. One of the easiest ways to make improvements to each step in your sales process is by role modeling people that are already good at it. This is the key to fast tracking your success. Now, some of the steps don't really take much effort to improve. For example, can you find a few more minutes to make 10% more calls? That's pretty simple. It's just a little bit more time. If you got a slightly better list to call or changed your calling time, would more people pick up? Of course they would. If you took some time to improve your referral language so that you were calling prospects that were referred to you and expecting your call, you could easily improve this metric by significantly more than 10% if you wanted to. How about if you role modeled the phoning language of the best salesperson in your office? Do you think you could increase your appointments by 10%? What about role modeling the closing language of the best closer in your office? Would that allow you to increase your close ratio by 10%? I'm guessing it would. And finally, if you worked on cross-selling and upselling, do you think you can increase your average sales price by 10%? That should be a no-brainer as well. The great thing about role modeling is that you can quickly learn from other people that have perfected each step in the sales process. This is a huge success hack that the best salespeople use all the time to improve their sales. Additionally, if you can't find a role model in your office or on your team, there are all sorts of sales books out there by gurus like Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Jeffrey Gitomer, Matthew Dixon, or Neil Rackman that will literally spell out the best practices for you. There are also great sales training programs out there like Sandler Sales Training and Dale Carnegie, as well as others that can help you as well. Finally, the ultimate cheat code here is to work with a great sales coach who can help you optimize your process quickly. If you work smarter by implementing best practices for each step in your sales process and move the needle by just a small amount, like 10%, you can massively increase your results without much effort. Now that you know the 3 steps you can take to maximize your sales process, let's talk about 3 proven strategies to increase your revenues. The first strategy is to simply increase the number of clients or customers that you have. If you keep your price the same and simply add more customers, your revenues are going to increase. The second way to increase your revenues is by increasing the price of your average sale. You can do this in 2 ways. One way is to simply increase your prices, and the other is to cross-sell and upsell your customers. For example, if you run a restaurant that sells burgers, you can increase the price of the burgers you sell, or you can cross-sell your customers by adding in fries and a Coke. Additionally, you can upsell them to larger portion sizes that cost more. All 3 of those things will increase your average sale. Finally, you can increase the number of repurchases that your client or customer makes. So sticking with the restaurant analogy, if you can get your customers to come in twice a week instead of once a week, then you've just increased your revenues. You can also exponentially increase your sales and revenues by leveraging all 3 of these strategies at the same time. So if you increase your prices by 10%, your amount of customers by 10%, and the frequency of repurchase by 10%, you'll end up with a 33% increase in your sales. If you fiddle around with each of these numbers, you'll start to see how powerful this strategy is. Just as an additional example, if you increase your customers by 33%, your prices by 25%, and the repurchases by 50%, you'll end up with a 249% increase to your revenue number. I'm sharing this with you because, as a salesperson, the price that you sell your product for, as well as how you bundle your products to cross-sell and upsell, makes a massive difference for your sales numbers. It doesn't take too much of an effort to cross-sell and upsell your existing customers, and if you're good in sales, you should be able to sell at a premium to your competitors. All of these things that we covered today will help you work smarter, not harder, and will help you be in the top 10% for sales in your company, no matter what you sell. So that wraps up today's podcast on the 3 simple steps that you can take to maximize your sales. By simply knowing your numbers, making small improvements at each step of the process, and role modeling others that have perfected each step, you'll be well on your way to working smarter, not harder, and massively increasing your results. If you found today's episode useful, you can also access a number of free resources that will help you improve your business as well as your leadership on my website at www.businesscoachchicago.com. Also, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, as I would love to connect with you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a review, and of course, invite your friends to listen in as well. I'm Tom Kelly, and until next time, enjoy your week.
You've been listening to the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. On this highly useful podcast for people in the business world, you get the absolute top-notch info from an absolute pro on how to elevate your business and your leadership skills. Tom Kelly owns Potential in Motion, coaching you to the edge of what's possible. He's also a professional speaker and leadership trainer. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the coaching business: Tony Robbins, Ken Blanchard, Jack Canfield, Brian Tracy. To sign up for a complimentary coaching session and to access some great free resources, hit the website at businesscoachchicago.com. Your success is not just a possibility, it's a certainty. See you next time on the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast.